Ene mana, ene waka, ene rea, e rā rangatira mā. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. No Inarangi, no Wiwi, no Huatene, no America o ka tupuna. I tipu ake au ki Manhattan, ki New Jersey, me California. Engari, kei Titarangi, toko kainga, kei te uru o Tamaki Makaro.
Kia ora.
No reira ka mihi kei te monga ko Waitakere, me te moana ko Tahimana. Ko Ngāti Kiwi te iwi, ko Liz Witherspoon toko ingoa, ko taku mahi ki Icehouse, ko te tumu whakahare whanakatanga.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Welcome. It's my pleasure and my privilege. By coincidence, but a really good one. We have Precious Clark with us today as our guest, a seat at the table. I say by coincidence because it's Māori Language Week. Mm-hmm. And Byron and I talked about it this morning and we thought, wow, was that by design or by luck? But whatever it is.
That intervention.
Yeah. That's welcome, Precious.
Yes, welcome, Precious. I am still thinking so much about the experience we had on Te Kaa and how much that's changed my world and given me a whole lot of perspective I didn't have before. So thank you for starting the organisation and for the team and what you guys do there. I thought I'd, before passing to you to introduce yourself, also say mai pipiha.
Tēnā koe, Brian.
Kia ora. No Irani, no ko te rana o ku tupuna. I tipu aki o ki, tamaki makoto. Engare kei tauronga, toku kainga. No reira, ka mihi, ki ti mawau, ko mawau. Mi te moana o tauronga. Ko Ngāti Kiwi te iwi, ko Briar Stewart, toku ingoa. Ko taku mahi, ki Icehouse, ko ti, kai whakahaere, hapori.
Tēnā koe.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Brian.
Kia ora, Byron.
Welcome, Precious. Thank you for being on the podcast, A Seat at the Table. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Tēnā koe o tira, tēnā koutou katoa. Tuatahi tika ki te mihi atu ki a koe Liz, me tō mihi tūwhera mō tēnei hui, e mihi ana. Kia kōrua tahi, me o kōrua pēpeha, ngā mihi nui, he tohu tira o te whakanuia I te wiki o te reo Māori, no reira mai taku manawa kia kōrua, nei rā te mihi. Ko wai ahau, he uri ahau no Ngāti Whātua, no te uri o hau, Waikato, Ngāti Pāua, Ngāti He, I te taha o tōku pāpa ko Ngāti Pākehā te iwi, ko Precious Clark taku ingoa, ko ahau te tumu whakarai ki Maurea Consulting Limited. First of all, thank you Liz for your mihi and your opening this morning. Thank you both for embracing Te Reo Māori and taking that leadership, especially given this week is Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, where we celebrate and embrace our beautiful Māori language. My name's Precious Clark. I hail from a number of tribes. Ngāti Whātua, we're based here. This is our ancestral footprint in central Auckland. The Uri o Hau, which is up in the Kaipara, Waikato, Mulu territory, Ngāti Pāua out in East Auckland, Ngāti He in Tauranga. And on my dad's side, I'm proudly a fifth generation New Zealand Pākehā with ancestry back into England, Ireland and Scotland, like most New Zealanders. Yeah. But it's a real privilege to be here, especially the tupuna intervention that brings us here for Māori Language Week. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
I'm going to start off with the first question, but I wanted to start off with, I don't have a papiha, but I do come from the Te Aotearoa iwi in New Plymouth, and my great-great-great-grandmother also had a moku. But I have grown up without learning the Māori language, and I just wanted to put that out there because I have strong ties, I have strong family ties, but I've grown up without learning the language. But I am starting to, and it is, it's I find it embarrassing. And when I try, I think I'm not doing it well enough. But this is so special. It really, really is. So I just wanted to start off with that. And Precious, we really would love to find out, what is your purpose? Why is Precious here? And what has led you to this purpose?
Yeah, kia ora. Can I just acknowledge what you shared with us first, Mel, and acknowledge the vulnerability and courage it takes to say that, and the courage it takes to start a journey, to reconnect with your cultural heritage that's always been a part of you, and with the reo, and it's not an easy journey for anybody, but it's harder for Māori, because there are so many layers of expectation that you have for yourself. And there was a beautiful documentary about Mike McRoberts' journey the other night, around his connection with te reo, and I'd highly recommend you watch it. It's very powerful. And he talked about how he would get extreme anxiety even saying kia ora, good evening, because of the level of expectation that was put upon him as being Māori. So you're not alone.
Wow. Brilliant.
You are so not alone. And actually more of our Māori people don't speak the reo than do. So you're certainly not alone, and there is a lot of people that are willing to tautoko and support you on that journey.
Thank you. I'm so glad I brought that up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, purpose.
Yes, purpose.
Purpose. I'm now clear about my purpose, and I'm very grateful that it aligns with my business's purpose. So that's, I guess, a benefit of being the chief executive of your own business, is you can ensure that these things align. And so the purpose of my company, which is called Maurea Consulting Limited, is to see Māori culture drive Aotearoa forward. And that is my personal purpose. And myself and my team, we fundamentally believe that there is significant value, depth, beauty and sophistication in our Māori culture. But for the most part of our interaction as New Zealanders, it's been held within Māori communities. The time is now to share and get that cross fertilisation. So we consider ourselves bridge builders between Māori culture and enterprise in all of its machinations. And so we take a really open approach to allow people to safely explore the beauty of our culture. And our intent is that through that, people can take it in their minds, in their hearts, and into their puku, so into their stomach, because our belief is that's where behaviour is driven from. So that's our ambition. Now, what's led me to this purpose? There's a couple of things. I was conceived during the occupation of Bastion Point, and then born into it. So that's my DNA. And Joe Hawke, who led that protest, is my mum's brother, and we lost him earlier this year in May. But he's been a stalwart in my life and has always supported me and developed my leadership potential. Even when I was at school, I remember being in 7th form, that's how long ago it was, because we called it 7th form. And he rang me up after school one day and he asked me, what are you doing? And I lied and said I was doing my homework. I wasn't. And he said, would you like to meet Nelson Mandela? And I went, yes. And he said, okay, you've got 15 minutes, order yourself a taxi, come to St. Matthew's Church in the city, I'll pay for it when you get here. So I dutifully followed my Uncle Joe's instructions, and when I arrived there, he said, okay, I want you to do karanga to Nelson Mandela. And I was completely blown away, and grateful for the opportunity, and did a good job, the best that I could do, and I believe it was a good job, alongside my auntie who actually taught me. And what I remember from that experience, I don't remember what Nelson Mandela said, but I remember the feeling, and I honestly felt like he bathed me in light. And my Uncle Joe has done that throughout my life as well. And so it was at that moment that I thought, Imagine, I'm not trying to be Nelson Mandela, and I'm not trying to be my Uncle Joe either, but imagine if in my leadership I could have an approach of bathing people in light. So these are some of the beautiful experiences that I've had in my life that have been created by really important people in my life. But another one was I went to London, and I went over there to get up to mischief, and I had a great crack at that.
We all.
Yeah, exactly. And while I was over there, I built a beautiful family. So Ngāti Rānana is a London-based Māori club, and it's open to anybody. So it's not just for Māori. We have a lot of Pākehā. We have people from other countries, America, Hawaii, Jamaica, come and be a part of that whānau. And I went over there quite arrogant. Yeah, quite arrogant. And I was a kind of person who used to say, that person's not a real Māori. Based on my privilege of being raised in my community, connected to my marae and connected to my whānau. Complete privilege that I was blind to. But going over there, I made beautiful friendships with people who were Māori and had a story of disconnect with their culture. And I was judging them for that, and it wasn't by their design. And I had a whole lot of knowledge that I could share with them to change that. So going there and engaging with that whānau helped me shift my mindset. So you'll never, ever, ever hear me describe any person as not being a real Māori anymore. And that helped me see that, and through that, and my experience in London, we term this phrase that Māori are globally hot, locally not. And while I was in London, people were fascinated by my culture. And every month I was travelling to a different country performing, doing kapahaka. And people really wanted to know about Māori culture. And I compared that with my experience of performance here in New Zealand, where we were being asked to get changed in toilets, public toilets. And overseas we were treated like the ballet, so you can see the difference in treatment. And decided that wanted to be a part of changing that narrative here in Aotearoa when I came back. But the ability to do that, I crafted some of that ability through my whānau in London and trialling some things, and that openness came from the generosity of that whānau. And then coming back to New Zealand, sometime later, I did a Global Women's Breakthrough Leadership Program, and it was headed by Sandy Burgum at the time. And Sandy is a dear friend of mine. She's my coach, mentor, friend, growler, wine sipper.
We all need a growler.
All of that. And through that process, Sandy continuously asked me, who do you want to be, not what do you want to do? And at the time, I was mainly doing governance roles. And I came to the conclusion, actually, I just want to be an ambassador for my culture. And she said, right, can you get paid for that? And I said, well, I haven't so far, so probably not. And she said, I want you to design a program, and I'm going to assess it, and we'll see how you go. And I actually turned around to her and swore at her and said, I'm too busy. I've got a new baby. I've got all this work. She said, just do it. And really didn't take me long to design Te Kaa, which both Liz and Briar have experienced. And so those are some of the real influential people and factors that helped me come to realise that this is the space I want to play in, which is helping people understand our culture, sharing it so that it informs our decision making and our behaviours, and that it brings me joy and that I'm good at it.
Beautiful.
Well done. I experienced the globally hot, locally not unquoted precious when I was home in the States. I was just saying these beautiful panama that we're wearing that those who are listening can't see, that were given to us when we finished Te Kaa. Well, I wear mine almost all the time. And my brother noticed it, and he's fascinated and wanted to know more about the panama and the Maori culture and so on. And again, just struck me as that in the number of conversations, whereas here I haven't had that that same, you do get it every once in a while, but not as much.
It's not as novel here. Yeah.
So, anyway, it's wonderful.
Is that changing?
Yes.
Is it moving on from getting changed in the public toilets?
Yes, it is moving on. People are becoming more aware that there is really good value in Māori culture, and we're not tapping into it. So if we think about the sustainability question, and how that links to kaitiakitanga. They're slightly different philosophies, but we're all clocking on that actually there's this 600-year-old practice of kaitiakitanga that is of this land that we're not tapping into to inform our practices as businesses, as human beings, as councils, as government. And that shift 10 years ago, that was a really hard conversation to advocate. Today, ears are opening to it. How we give effect to it is still up in the air, and we have successes and failures, but there's an opening of hearts, minds and ears to it. And even if we look at the prevalence of te reo Māori in the public environment, 6 years ago we couldn't imagine that common New Zealanders, that Kiwis, non-Māori, would embrace te reo for a te reo Māori moment. Today it's what we do. It's become a part of our culture, and it's a really heartening shift. And very, very grateful to see it in my lifetime.
A couple of things you said, be, not do. I think that's so important. And also creating a safe place to be able to have these discussions. And that was my experience on Te Kaa, 100%. I honestly, similar to you, Mal, where I'm like very nervous to say things wrong or to disrespect anyone. With no intentions to, but from the get-go, a safe environment at Te Kaa to speak, to ask questions. There were some debates, there were some discussions there that were controversial, but it was a safe place to be able to do that. And I remember you mentioning during it that there are ways to to protect yourself and to open up conversations with people so that they can have their own self-discovery. And I've experienced that, whether it's with family or friends, actually feeling what is the best way to engage in this conversation. Yeah, I would love if you could unpack that for people that are going on their own journey or wanting to start that conversation. Where is the best place to start there to protect yourself and the people you're with and the culture? Yeah,
if my memory serves me right, Brian, what we're talking about is how I ended our treaty session. So we spent a whole day discussing Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi, and it's a sensitive topic. It's got baggage, years and years of baggage, and there's significant mamae pain attached to that. And at the end of the day, I do highlight that you've had a privilege to spend a whole day focused on that, and most New Zealanders don't. Yeah. Most New Zealanders haven't read the treaty. They don't know that it actually fits in size 12 font on an A4 size piece of paper, two-sided, both the Māori and the English versions. That's how small it is.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I'm going to put my hand up and say I did not know.
Most people don't. So that's how small the text is. And what I share at the end of that is you've been in a privileged position, and no doubt you're going to want to go out into your community, networks, family, and discuss and share what you've learned. But because it's so sensitive, you have to be mindful that if you take positions around it, there is only one way for them to respond, and that is to take a position, and that can help you arrive to a point of conflict. What you want to do is take a position, I believe, take a position that allows for dialogue. So I think I suggested move into coaching conversations as opposed to taking positions. So as an example, a position might be, the Crown were wrong for doing blah, 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 blah. Yeah. A coaching approach would be, what are your thoughts around the Crown's response to this? And then you facilitate dialogue instead of stating a position, especially around kaupapa that are as sensitive as Te Tiriti o Waitangi, that are also most New Zealanders are so poorly informed about. Yeah, so that was it. But in that, it's around, you don't want to lose friendships as a result of what you've learnt, but I'll be really upfront, as a part of Te Kaa, we are trying to have more ambassadors in our society to open up this dialogue. So we do want you to have that discussion. So how do we, equip you as best as we can to be able to do that without losing those relationships? That's why we are so upfront about moving into that kōrero.
Well, in that day on Te Reo Waitangi, I mean, it was learning for all of us. None of us had, a sense of it. I take my kind of no reason why I couldn't get here and have discovered some things, but I think the way that you positioned it, Precious, for us was, to go into those conversations in the way you've just said, which is, today I learned something and it's made me think about this, or it's made me question this, and then, what do you think, Briar? And instead of, again, stating a position that immediately makes people feel defensive.
Yes, that's all around that.
Or not, or because they don't know, they feel unable to engage with you, because you've had the learning but they haven't.
Now, one of our key values for Maurea, and it's one of the values that we teach in Te Kaa, is manaakitanga. And so manaakitanga is commonly known as care and generosity and catering, that kind of stuff. It's much deeper, as you guys will recall. It's about caring for the mana of another person or collective, who you're engaging with. And so for us at Maurea, this drives the way that we engage with our participants in Te Kaa. Manaakitanga is our number one value, so we're always striving to reach that and creating a safe space for people to explore Te Ao Māori is all a part of us breathing life into that particular value. It's not always easy, and it does take a lot of training to allow things to wash over, but we do have to fundamentally believe that everyone who comes to us comes with a curious mindset and are open to hearing, open to potentially challenging their viewpoints, and open to changing. And so that means that we have to be open to that as well. But it does take a while to get used to that.
Do you think that came from your learning in London, going, okay, like you said, you were saying people weren't probably Māori, or judging them or whatever, like we all do as humans. Do you think that is such a strong value for you because it's come from a learning of that time?
Oh, definitely. That experience and others that I have gathered over my lifetime, I've made some serious mistakes, but I make more wins when I apply that value. I have more successes when I apply that.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
What does a seat at the table mean to you, Precious?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because tables are different. So I do have the privilege of being a director and have been director on a number of different boards, but if I was to create a table, which I have the benefit of doing through my business and through our programs, it wouldn't be a board table, it would be a kitchen table.
Awesome.
And at a kitchen table, certainly at my kitchen table, my kids get to communicate, they get to ask questions, they get to offer opinions. Whether or not we agree with it is another matter. My husband and I have a lot of dialogue at our kitchen table, and so with that kind of approach, there is a sharing of power and there is a sharing of decision making. So for me, being at the table is being a part of the decision making, but also it's about being a part of the culture that sets that, and having the people around that table have ears, minds and hearts open to hearing and being influenced by that conversation. It's important to be at the table, and I will always advocate to be at the table rather than influence from the outside. And even though sometimes being at the table you might be a minority and you might be tokenized, being the minority, I would still advocate to sit there. And I've been in those positions and I would still advocate to be at the table. You just play the game a little bit differently. But if I could create the table, it wouldn't be a game, it would be a kitchen.
So how do we move, or how do we transfer that from the board table to the kitchen table? Is there a way of doing that? Because I love that analogy. That's absolutely brilliant. Can we, as a nation or as business leaders, move that sort of board table practice into a kitchen table practice? And how do we do that?
I think it's around, if we're focusing on the boardroom, it's around the culture of the boardroom and facilitating that kind of dialogue. When you go into a boardroom, and if you're a director, so I'm guessing you would agree with me, you do your readings. As you're doing your readings and you come to understand your business, you are looking for the value that you can add, and you're often advocating really strongly for your position. the thing I'm talking about is not coming with a position. It's coming with an openness and bringing your experience and your expertise, but an openness to shift. But if I think about how do you create a tokenistic environment, and how do you shift that? That is by design. So many Māori today, many of my friends who are very astute, competent directors, we will refuse to go on boards if we're the only Māori. So in the design, you have to have at least 2 voices. Actually, I'd say that starting point, there's a percentage, there's a ratio. So at least 30% would need to be Māori for you to be able to create the change towards positive outcomes for Māori by Māori. And the rationale for that, the reason for that is, as an individual, you can't communicate in 20 different ways. You have your own fundamental communication styles, and you have your own way of processing things. And sometimes that way of communicating lands well with people, and sometimes it doesn't. But if you have another person around that board table who understands that dynamic and has a different communication style, then you are able to open people's ears, hearts and minds that little bit more. It's not uncommon for Māori to feel marginalised in the boardroom if they are the only one there, and ineffective. And when you feel ineffective, you question, why are you even there? No one gets up in the morning to go, I'm going to do a shit job today.
Put me in as many places as I can because I want to fail.
Everyone gets up going, man, I want to add value to what's important. But we have to look at the design to affect that. I guess that's my first one. And then once you do have the design, it really is around how committed are you to listening? And that's a question for us all to continuously answer about all things. So those are my little tidbits that I'd offer there.
It's come up a little bit, but Māori tokenism, and I'd love to unpack that and just hear what your experience has been in that, because we're seeing more uptake of Māori culture, which I love, on the news, in our Whittaker's chocolate, and little things where I'm like, awesome, like how cool that this is becoming a part of who we are, more than even in the last 5-10 years beyond that. I'm sure through it though there's parts of Māori tokenism, and I'd like to hear from you what that experience has been like.
I guess I'd preface that by saying that what is token tomorrow was probably innovative yesterday. And I say that because if we concern ourselves with tokenism, we might not take any steps at all. And so you're looking at what's worse, no action or getting some things wrong along the way. And I would say no action is worse than trying some things and having a mindset of, hey man, I might muck up here, declare it, apologise, figure out a solution, keep going. So I just want to preface that conversation with that. Don't want to give anyone an excuse to not take action, you see?
Love that.
And then what is my experience of feeling tokenised? Well, it's never a kind or a great experience, but it builds fortitude in an individual. But we're trying to figure out how do you shift systems rather than how do you build fortitude within an individual who only has a lifespan of whatever it is. How do you change tokenism within a business? Well, it's around being committed to a shift. And so if your shift is as a result of compliance, and a lot of business shifts are as a result of compliance, particularly when you look at procurement strategies that are coming out from government and also local government around, either 5% or 10% you must procure to Māori business. These are compliance motivators that help drive that shift in business. Move it, and that's an important first step. But to move away from tokenism is moving from there to desired intent. Like, we're doing this because we think this is really good for us. So that's, and that requires commitment, it requires honesty, and it requires honesty about how far you're willing to move and how quickly you can do that as well. And in that, we have to have some frank conversations with ourselves and with our teams and with our people around how much much change are you willing to tolerate, and if the organisation wants to go here, you're in the right place. If you don't want to go there, you're in the right place. And if not, if you're still feeling uncomfortable, what education can we provide you to help you arrive at with more comfort with this direction? So I'd stage it in that way.
So interesting. Thanks for mentioning that at the start, though, that it's actually better just to try and to do something, because there's been times where I've gone to say something and been like, oh, I feel like an imposter, or I feel like that might come across in the wrong way. But then I weigh up in my mind, well, if I get it wrong, it's still worth me doing, and it's at least I'm on this journey, and at least I'm giving it a go. And so I appreciate that you said that.
And just to add to that, as Māori, we've shifted around this space as well. So it was quite common in the 80s and 90s for if you didn't pronounce words correctly in Māori, you were slammed. And there was narrative that said if you can't kōrero, don't do it at all. We've grown in our thinking. Our thinking as Māori people has evolved. We've recognised we only make up between 15 and 18% of the population, and that's an even smaller percent of those who are eligible to vote, and there's even a smaller percent of those who do vote. So in a democratic society, our voice is really, really tiny. It's really small, and if we're the only ones who are prioritising, promoting, embracing our reo, it will remain severely endangered. So it's considered severely endangered by the United Nations. If we don't have a nation of 5 million embracing it and socialising our reo, it will become extinct. And so we've realised that the benefit of data and statistics feeds this information back to us and helps us pivot and develop new strategies. So today it's a socialisation strategy. It's a recognition that we need all New Zealanders to have a base level of knowledge of te reo for this to survive. So our narrative has changed to just give it a go with the expectation that you will get better and you will commit to getting better, but just give it a go.
And I've felt it too, bro, and you know it because I now start most programs that way, and it felt very kind of imposterish at first, but then I thought, no. And then what I do is if there's someone in the room that can give me feedback, I ask for it.
Ka pai, Liz. That's not easy.
No. And again, you have to be careful of how you do that too, because but it's wonderful, or someone will offer feedback, because they want to help you to do it better. And it's the same, I guess, in the dialogue around, not about speaking in te reo, but in the dialogue around te Māori and how that fits into what we're doing and how we can have more conversations like that.
It's really interesting.
How does this drive businesses forward?
How does Māori culture drive businesses forward?
Great.
Yeah, it's a good question. I can talk about it with regards to our Te Kaa program, which is a program that ignites the Māori cultural competency of those who come through. It's not the be-all and end-all, as people do realise, oh man, there's a lot that I don't know, but it sparks, it ignites an interest. What we see through Te Kaa and through our Māori culture, and it's a byproduct of our program, it's nothing that we advertise, but the level of camaraderie that is built through the exercise of our values and these conversations is always something that is fed back to us as an organisation. And when you have a tighter crew as a team, that amounts to better productivity. The data's all there. Also, in terms of driving Aotearoa forward, so I'm currently on the Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei Trust. Earlier this year, I resigned from the Whairawa board, which is our commercial board, where I'd served for 10 years. And in that 10 years, we built our asset base from just under 300 million to 1.2 billion. And that's because we applied our whakaaro Māori, our mātauranga Māori, our Māori principles. We focused on our environment, we focused on our people, and we were able to lead our business in a way that, in anyone's eyes, that's a success. We have significant social outcomes that we have to achieve, and that has put us in, proud of our success. And so these are things that can be applied in business, but they're just not that often shared. And so if our business is led out with manaakitanga, how might that impact your relationships with your colleagues, your relationships with your clients, how you care for your product? If you lead out with kaitiakitanga, how does that inform your decisions? How does that inform circular economies? How does that inform how you might repackage things, or how you might sell things, or what you might say no to? You know, we often get asked to participate in some really amazing business opportunities, and some of them we just look at our values alignment and say, no, this would generate a really good income, but we cannot. Based on the value of kaitiakitanga, we can't participate in this business venture. So those are the ways I think that Māori culture can support our New Zealand businesses to get that edge globally.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I love how you talk about poku. One of our values at Social Arts is trust your gut.
Oh, yeah, good.
And we talk about it all the time. What is your inner self telling you about this situation? So that's very cool.
It's a very common conversation with wahine.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, with my wahine colleagues, that's a normal part of our discussion. It's not as prevalent with Tāne, with men.
Tāne, I agree, because I think it's that sense, as wahine, I think we have a really strong sense of, the heart will rule the head 99% of the time. Is if this is in conflict with this will win out. But what's going on here in terms of our self-concept and our, all the things that are so
intuition
will rule this and this out. If push comes to shove, and it's and I think that one of the learnings I've had, and that we're trying to think about in the context of the Icehouse related to kaikitanga, is that idea that in order to do good, you have to do well, and in order to do well, you have to do good.
Yeah.
And they're not
mutually exclusive.
Yeah, and how do we make better decisions on the basis of exactly that? Because the same, there's very commercially compelling things that you can do, and we have to figure out how to make good decisions based on more than just that.
Yeah, and I guess a fundamental difference between Māori business and non-Māori business is the concept of atua. So, our gods, which are things that you find in nature that are personified. So Rangi Nui, Sky Father, Papa Tuanuku, Earth Mother, Tāwhiri Mātea, the God of the Wind. We make decisions based on our relationship to our atua in our business. That's something that's different, and so whakapapa, that genealogical connection that we have with humans, as well as all things that are found in nature, drives some of our decision making. That's a difference between Māori businesses and non-Māori businesses, but it doesn't have to exclude non-Māori business from caring about those things as well. But the drivers are slightly different. Ours is whakapapa based. And they're our atua, we have an obligation and responsibility to them. But for a long time, this thinking was lost to us. We're reclaiming a lot of this thinking. But I know from my board tables, and particularly in Māori space, we are driving our decision making around our relationship to our atua. In our housing developments, we are talking about how do we allow atua to be a more regular part of our everyday life. So how are we thinking about how wind comes through? How are we thinking about engagement with Tāne Mahuta, the god of the forest, in our design of our housing developments? These are a part of our conversations in my board tables.
Is that how ultimately you care for the people as well? So you say that the Māori culture, you care for the environment, and also business culture, the environment, and also your people. How do you care for your people? What's different?
Oh, I don't know how to unpick the question.
Is there something that we can learn from the Māori culture in caring for our people?
We I'm privileged, so I just got to put that on the table. Not every Māori person has the same experience of engaging with their whānau in the way that I do. So when I wake up in the morning, I'm so blessed. I'm usually woken up by my son jumping in for cuddles, and then I open my blinds and I see my moana, the waitemata. I see my maunga keke, and I see my marae, ōrākei. I'm really privileged, and so every morning I'm grateful that I get to live on my ancestral land, and my closest 100 neighbours are my cousins.
Wow.
So we live collective. We've been raised collective, and we continue to live collective. But not everybody gets to live with their whānau as their neighbours. So, recognising my privilege. So my response is all based on my privilege. But it's that collective nature. Our mana is attached to one another. So, the mana of my Uncle Joe was significant. Everyone in my tribe benefited from his mana. The mana of my cousins, I benefit from their mana. The mana that I am able to achieve, they benefit from that as well. So we are interconnected through our cultural practices as well as whakapapa, and so we're constantly thinking about each other. And when you look at our social structures, we talk about waka being the biggest confederation, and then iwi being the tribes, hapu being the sub-tribes, and whānau being the family units. Very rarely do we talk about the individual. These are examples of that collective thinking. It's ever present. And we also have, whakatauki in our culture, sometimes to our own detriment, but there's one that says, e hara te kumara e kōrero mo tōna reka. So the kumara doesn't speak of its own sweetness. It lets the potato do that. So we have these practices and philosophies that make it very difficult to only think about the individual, sometimes to our detriment. So the detrimental side is we can be really we can lack in our ability to sell ourselves in interviews because we're not trained to talk about ourselves. We're trained to think about the collective. Yeah. And so in my business, I try to create whānau environment, even though we're not necessarily blood related. Most of my team are. But trying to create that whānau unit, what I've recognised is that, and people have asked me, does that make it really difficult to have frank conversations? And frank conversations are always tough. No one enjoys confrontation. But it makes it more important to do that because there's more on the line. Like my cousins live across the road, my colleagues' cousins live across the road from me. And we don't want to get into a position where we don't enjoy waving out to one another. Because that's more important to us. It was more important before we worked together, and it will be more important after we finish working together. So these are the kinds of things that I do in my Māori business, and what I observe we do as an iwi to think about each other. It does give rise to the question of how do you achieve equity. So for Ngāti Whātua in particular, we're just over 6,000. We're wealthy for just over 6,000 people compared to other iwi. At 6,000, we're now about 1.5 billion. So we have a lot of assets and a lot of a healthy balance sheet that can facilitate us delivering to our whānau. The majority of our whānau are in Auckland, and of those in Auckland, they're mostly in Ōrākei, my neighbours. But we have whānau living throughout Aotearoa, and we have whānau, 15% of us are in Australia, and we even have whānau in Israel and in England. How do we achieve equity for all whānau, given that equity isn't a traditional model for Māori? A traditional model for Māori is if you do the mahi, you do the work, you get the treats. So if you're present and you help, then you benefit from the collective work. So those are some questions we are still ironing out. And there are differing viewpoints about how we prioritise supporting our whānau. But I guess these are insights into things that Māoridom are thinking about today.
It's reminded me of my favourite Māori proverb. what's the most important thing in the world? You made the Hapu the Māori version, but he tangata. He tangata. And I always remind myself of that. What is the most important thing in the world? The people. And I was really taken aback by how Māori do business, and how I don't think there's a great understanding of just how effective their practices are in terms of wealth generation and choosing what they invest into, and looking at from a perspective of the environment, of the people. It's very, very inspiring for sure. But I wonder if you could remind us of the 5 whys, because that was something that really inspired me, and I think it's good business practice.
Yeah, so the 5 whys, WAI''S. It's an article that is publicly available, and it's written by a magnificent man called Aotearoa, and it was written some time ago, and it basically outlines how you might approach engaging Māori. And so the whys are like ko wai, as in who are you, he wai, what's your Māori cultural competency, and the 5 whys are essentially what is the purpose or the intent of the engagement. In understanding the intent of the engagement, what are the benefits to Māori? Because I kid you not, being on the board of Ngāti Whātua prior to COVID, it was common to be asked at least 3 times a month for a relationship with my iwi, because we're in central Auckland and because we have a healthy balance sheet. And so for those reasons, people wanted to engage with us, and sometimes those connections we could see an alignment in our strategic objectives, and other times there was absolutely no alignment, but people were offended if we said no. And so understanding why you want to engage and what is of benefit to Māori in that engagement is really important, because you need to get your foot in the door first. And if we can't see alignment, then we've got a million other things to invest our time in, right?
Totally.
And then it's around who are the right people to guide you through this engagement. So I strongly advocate finding the right navigator, because your team might not be equipped or have the network or the capability to create engagement with Māori. So who can you reach out to that might be well suited for that? And certainly with one of my clients, we were looking at pitching for a really big contract with an iwi group, and I said, I'm not the right person to navigate you to that iwi group, but I know who is. So how about we contract him in for this purpose, and he will get you your foot in the door. He will get you the ear of the chair, and he'll get you the ear of the CE. So there's those kinds of things that become really important to put yourself into a really good position, and then underpinning all of that is to develop your own Māori cultural competency. So know that you have practice in te reo. Know that you have a pepeha, so that you can demonstrate that you've taken time, energy to commit to things that are important to Māori. And I hope that in doing that, your experience to date has been a positive reaction from Māori when you do that. Even if you feel that your pronunciation isn't 100% yet. So building that rapport and having that competency to know a little bit about their iwi, what's important to them, how you hold yourself, how you behave, how you recognise the flow of things, and that it's always subject to change, and being comfortable with all of that. So that's essentially what that, again, I think it's only 2-sided A4 piece of paper article written by Aotearoa can give you insights into. It's all about how to set yourself up to be able to successfully engage with Māori if you have the opportunity.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I love that. What would your recommendation be if someone's within a business and they're wanting to talk to their leadership about authentically going on a journey of integrating some of these Māori values into the business, but they're not sure how to start that conversation on, hey, I think it's time for us as a business to actually step up here and be bold and experience the Māori culture and start integrating those things. How does an employee start a conversation with a leader like that?
It's really tricky. It's a really tricky one. And we've had a number of employees come to us to ask us for help, but the leadership weren't ready. Really ready for that. What we do as a practice is say, can you bring your leadership to the table with us? and then it puts the onus on us to explain the benefit as opposed to an employee to explain a benefit of an unknown. But in my explaining of the benefit, depending on where that organisation is at in terms of their priorities, what do they see as the number one priority will determine what I discuss. But if they're in business, they're generally interested in business and staying alive in business. And so if they come across as primarily interested in their bottom line, then I will talk about the growth of the Māori economy. And the Māori economy has only one trajectory, and it is growth. And the Māori economy, we are getting very particular about who we allow to participate in business with us. And so on my boards for Ngāti Whātua, both our commercial and our parent board, we changed our procurement policies to say that you have to be able to demonstrate that you have Māori cultural competency. What we observed is that we were spending millions with organisations that we were investing our time, energy and resource into training to understand us. And our expectation is that you come with it now. So that's one point, is around the Māori economy. That tends to help people open their ears to be able to listen. And then it's around what is it to be a great New Zealand company? What does it take? And how do you shape and inform the identity of your New Zealand business? So a number of the organisations we work with straddle both of those points. And then for others, it might be, we have no social licence to operate unless we do this. So there's those different approaches, and dependent on what they share with me determines my response. But it's usually one of those three things.
It's the 5 whys in practice. Isn't it?
Yeah.
It's how do you take what's going on in their world, and sometimes it's the other way too. Where you are a leader who believes in this, and you're trying to bring your people along with you. And that equally requires help sometimes. In terms of how it gets positioned around why it does make sense. And not to be a sales pitch, but that's where we offer Te Kaa, because Te Kaa is a Māori cultural competency journey that helps people transform and transform to being ambassadors and ignited to want to take action. And so we help by supporting organisations to build that critical mass and arriving at a tipping point so that you're either on the waka or you're left behind.
So interesting. It's actually my business partner that was encouraging me to embrace my Māori culture, and I dug my heels in, and I was like, no, I not because I didn't want to, but I was embarrassed to get it wrong. And now I see that it wasn't tokenism. It was her going, embrace it, get amongst. And it was actually me that was digging my heels in, which is interesting. And I didn't
come
do it because I didn't want to.
I
know, I need to.
We watched it happen. We so watched it happen in amongst the 15 of us at different points. And we had people in the team who have Maori, whakapapa, and
or Pacific whakapapa too.
Yeah, exactly. And to watch that sense of almost relief at certain points. To be in a place where they could have it ignited. And so, I can't say enough about that experience in an organisation. And it was absolutely, we have other people in our team who couldn't be in it or chose not to be, and they're thinking twice.
Sure.
Awesome.
But it was a team bonding thing. It was just massive. Like we got vulnerable with each other. I've shared before, I think, on this podcast around the vulnerability for me in that first session. Very dyslexic. Very much struggle with reading the English language, let alone another, with different vowels and things.
Yes.
So I'm hiding my little phonetic version over here, but it helps me to learn it and say it. But that was massive for me, standing in front of my colleagues, sharing my pepeha with no little secret practice in the back to try bring something, and it was vulnerability that I think brought me closer to the team, made us go, we're in this together, and helped us, I think, that session being in person and just helped us go, cool, it's okay if we don't know it and don't get it right. And it's been a really interesting journey for me on that personally, to keep saying the words and being confident and getting it wrong, and but yeah, it's just been incredible, and so I couldn't speak highly of it enough. But
Thank you. I don't have to be a kumara.
It's very cool. Precious, what does success look like for you?
Oh gosh,
it's a big one, I know, but we're nearing the end, and I'd love to hear that perspective from you.
Gosh, I think my number one priority would be the relationships. Success and maintenance of relationships.
Wow.
When I'm thinking of my role as a CE of my team and as a tribal leader, it's around that. When I'm thinking what does success look like from the purpose, from my purpose, it's that people don't seek to destroy Māori culture. It's that when concepts like co-governance arise in our society, there isn't an immediate response to flatten it, to destroy it. There's a willingness to engage and explore it. Success to me looks like that everyone feels proud of their connections, whether it be whakapapa connection or lived experience to our natural environment. And as a result of that, we take responsibility for caring for it, right down to decision making about which scrubbing brush we're going to buy for our kitchen. I think those are probably my top notes.
Yeah, that's so cool.
I think it's the other thing that has struck me as we've looked at the Māori worldview and is the long-term nature of it. It's yes, we have to make decisions for the short term and the medium term, but the perspective is so much longer around what's important. Well, this perspective is so much longer, and therefore that creates a greater sense of what's important today.
We're very comfortable with taking a long-term approach, and in many ways it's really, really wise because you recognise you're building foundations. There is a flip side of that though. There are detrimental impacts as well, and that we might not have the same sense of urgency around things that require urgency. So there's always a balance. It also means that as a business owner, you don't develop exit strategies. You develop how might you pass this on with an expectation that your kids want to do the same kind of thing as you. So we, I'm observing of my own practice. Am I defining my kids' future in that? And so I just want to pick that apart for myself a little bit because I have that long-term objective. So those are some of the things that I'm observing of that.
Yeah, but I think, again, it probably will come to how you define, it's not an exit strategy, it's a transition strategy, but you're going to exit at some point.
I actually, I have told myself, I don't think I'll ever retire, I just change to unpaid work. But that's not healthy for my well-being actually, so I've got to shift my mindset. And when I looked at what has informed that mindset, it is the long-term nature and concept of service leadership that I value, but recognising there's a balance that needs to be inserted here.
I've watched interviews before of your Heart for Wahine business leaders and those in governance roles and things like that. What is your what is your purpose around that, and what work have you done to raise the profile of those leaders?
I've created space for others to take opportunities. So where I've been asked to go onto boards, I've said no and asked others to step into those roles so they have those opportunities. Because we do run the risk of building empires, and the risk of that is that others don't get the opportunity, but also we get fatigued and spread a bit thin. So yeah, there have been a number of times where I'll just go, actually, I don't think I'm the right person, or I don't have the time, and here's a fantastic person that you just didn't know about. So I do quite a bit of that. But I went to all-girls high school. I went to Auckland Girls Grammar. Yeah. And I was in Kahurangi ki Maungawhau, which was the full immersion unit. And there I developed a love for wahine and a sisterhood that has steered me well the remainder of my life, and so I'm really committed to that. And the best way I can do that is to create opportunity and advocate for the value of wahine Māori in particular being at the board table.
How cool is that? Going, instead of just going, sorry, I can't do it, I don't have capacity, full stop. It's okay, I can't do it yet, I've got this whole community.
Yeah, I never say no, I can't do it. Every time I get asked by a recruiter, I do say, what are you looking for? I can connect you with these people. And I guess through that I get to build relationships with those recruiters, because I'm able to help them access a network that they don't have access to but are looking for. And if it came to the time, there's always things come back around, there's always reciprocity, because in the future when I might want to step into more governance roles, they might recall that I did help them. But that's not my driver. It's not my driver, but I know that's how mana works.
It's selfless.
Flows back around.
It's selfless to step aside and let someone step in, and that selflessness.
Yeah, and a little bit selfish in knowing that I couldn't possibly do a good job. And when you can't do a good job, you don't feel great.
Too true.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and like with my staff, I'm really supportive of them moving into governance, and I say, whatever you get paid for it, that's yours. I'm okay with you taking time out of work to do that, because it adds value to your role.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And if you can have experience at a governance level and be in an executive level in an organisation, that's really valuable experience.
Why is it valuable?
You think differently. Yeah. And so when you can understand at a governance level, which is about setting direction, holding to account, building culture, providing leadership, the way you think there is really different to how you operationalise things. And if you can straddle across both, you add more value to whatever you're engaged in.
I didn't think of it like that.
And also there's significant kudos that comes with being a director. So it opens doors in ways that being in management don't necessarily provide you. So I would say that a part of the ability for Maurea to grow was based on my reputation as a governor in the business environment, and having confidence to engage with board members and exec members and CEs, because I learnt that in a board environment.
Interesting. Did you have the confidence before?
I would say I'm a pretty confident person. Whether or not I had the capability, that's another matter. But sometimes you fake it till you make it and you learn.
And I think the other thing that I've observed that you're challenging, Precious, is not just wahine in governance roles, but it's younger. The age thing. If I look at your team, they're not, they're quite young.
Yeah, we're pretty young.
And so creating opportunities for younger people to sit at those tables is quite significant for New Zealand, I think.
Absolutely. The tide is turning.
I would say that I think I went into governance too young. It's common, or was common, I think it's changing now, but it was common as boards recognise, we're missing Māori at the table, we need to get them on. I was young, a female who was Māori. I took a lot of diversity boxes. If I was disabled and had a female partner, I would tick all of them, essentially. So 3 out of 5.
Almost there.
Pretty good. But I stepped into governance before having executive experience. Fortunately, the boards that I was on recognised that and accepted that. I had a massive growth path. Still added value, but I think I was a little bit ahead of my time. But it took me a while. Like, I can remember I'd go to boards and I'd come home and I'd talk with my husband and I'd be like, I'm lost, I'm really lost in this conversation, I don't get it. And then it did start to turn to say, I think I added some value today. I think I contributed well today. But I could have sped that process up if I had a bit more executive experience under my belt. Yeah.
And I think that's where you sometimes can create opportunities, and we're encouraging, organizations that we work with in this way is to allow people to come into boardrooms as observers.
Yes,
they don't necessarily
and associate
have to be in formal roles. They can sit in the room to learn by observing, and where they maybe could add some value, have a voice, but not to be there at, so they're kind of at the table, but not at the table.
Yeah, we've implemented that at Ngāti Whātua. We've been running an associate director program for about 8 years now to allow our younger whānau and sharp whānau members to come in and understand the dynamic and get to understand their business. They're the shareholders.
Because you get that opportunity for reverse mentoring too, where the younger can learn from the older, more experienced, but the older, more experienced can learn from these bright minds.
Provided you structure it that way, you've got to design it and create the time for that. And I think the criticism I have of our associate directorship is that we haven't done that yet.
If you were an SME business owner,
I am.
Yes, true.
As an SME business owner.
As a SME business owner, but looking out, how would you design a board from scratch? What would make the best types of people to be on that board or kitchen table?
Oh, yeah, I haven't taken that leap. I'm a little bit nervous of it.
Yep. That's
Why?
Control.
Yep.
Accountability. If I'm perfectly honest.
Yeah.
Those are the two main ones. But I do have a network of trusted confidence that I do reach out to. Who would be on? No, it wouldn't be who. It would be what would be the skill sets I would have on my board. I think it's a good balance, male, female. I would put someone with a really strong financial head on there, but I'm a people business, so I really need people with high EQ and CQ to help me understand that, how to get better, get better at that part of my business. I wouldn't have too many, 3 max. 3 max.
Wow, that's interesting.
And I would want to pay them. I'd want to remunerate them because I want them to have skin in the game as well, not just be an advisory function where there is a perception of separation.
That's really interesting.
Those would be but I have refused to think about this.
I'm sorry to tell you that.
It's not foreign to us.
And going through the Icehouse program, this is something that is presented through that program, and so I started to go, what would this look like, and then quickly closed it down and thought of all of the other things that I could prioritise that emerged out of that program.
No, that's awesome. Cool. Been such an honour chatting to you today, Precious. I'd love to end with one question we like to ask people, and who's one person that's been influential in your journey that you'd like to thank?
Oh, I probably mentioned them. It's my Uncle Joe and Sandy. So I think I'll end with Sandy because Sandy Burgum, who runs Play Contemporary Leadership Collaboration, she is just a phenomenal person to have on your team. And the things that Sandy did for me to help me get all of this kick-started was, first of all, make me design Te Kaa. She then let me practice in her own programs. So she brought me in to run some of her leadership programs to help people understand the Māori dimension, and through that I got to test some things. When I delivered my first ever Te Kaa program, she helped me sell it. She let me run it out of her building because there was no money, and she came on it so that she could critique it. and she continued to help me sell it. She raves about it to anyone who's willing to listen. So the growth of Maurea has been strongly aligned with the support of Sandy. So if people are looking for someone to help them really challenge and grow their leadership, and to have one of the best cheerleaders alongside them, I couldn't rave about her highly enough. It's wonderful.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah. And she's a great friend.
Yeah.
And she never stops answering the phone if you've got something to chew the fat about.
She sounds amazing.
Yeah, we all need those people in our worlds.
Yeah, I love her. Yeah, I'll tell her.
Amazing.
That's so cool. Thank you so much, Precious.
You're welcome.
Appreciate the conversation.
Me too, thank you. That was really enjoyable, and I just love being around mahine, so kia ora rā koutou katoa.
Yeah.